So this is going to be a really, really fun and interesting session. When we think about today we're really going to dive into some of the world's leading brands and how they think about the total cost of fraud, how they think about business value and business impact with all these projects that we do around payments and fraud. I'd like to first do a quick round of introduction from our panelists today. Genevieve.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Genevieve Joubert. I'm a partner at PwC's Financial Crimes and Fraud practice, and I specialize in fraud management. So I help advise executives in how to prevent, detect, and respond to fraud, and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you. Betsy.
I'm Betsy Benefeld with IHG Hotels and Resorts, and I lead the planning and delivery for our subset of hotel, commercial, and owner products. So I'm here because we implemented our Forder solution.
Denise.
Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Ertan. I lead the buyer risk team at eBay. We focus on mitigating fraud and protecting our legitimate buyers throughout their journey from account creation, transaction risk, and just dispute chargeback management. So nice to meet you all.
Welcome. Matt.
Hello, everybody. Matt Lampert from Wayfair. I'm the head of our fraud technology teams. We focus primarily on payments fraud and ATO.
Thank you. Well, welcome, everybody. So our first question is really around how do we measure business value as a whole? When we think about the total cost of fraud, we typically look at revenue that you're giving up by managing the risk and also what you can recoup. But it could be a lot broader than that. And Genevieve, I'd like to start with you because you really have a broad industry perspective on this. What are some of the dimensions you look at when you think about the programs and everything that we run around fraud and risk? How do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have obviously the privilege to see how fraud is managed across industries, including e-commerce, obviously. So at PwC, we use a framework that has 5 categories to measure business value and total cost of fraud. So the first category, obviously, we look at financial losses. Second category is around operational expense. So basically the cost of the people around supporting the fraud program and the tools to prevent, detect, and respond to fraud. The third category is around customer experience, right? So looking at customer satisfaction ratings as well as complaints. And then the fourth category is around business enablement. So your approval rates, your churn rates, your customer lifetime value. And last but not the least, it's around regulatory, reputational, and compliance. So across all those categories, we have metrics to measure the effectiveness of a fraud program.
Very interesting. Betsy, you work in an environment where maybe you don't have control of all those metrics and you have franchisees that you work with. How do these dimensions tie into how you think about the cost of fraud?
Yeah,
business value created.
As a big franchise company, we measure value by our offer to the owner. So whether that be by the brands, technology, services that we provide, we want to be their number one choice to invest with. So when you think about cost, it's really trade-offs. And we're looking to reduce fraud for our owners so that they can spend their time with higher value interactions. So when you think from my perspective in the product and technology hat, we're looking for cost to reward. If something is relatively easy to implement and results in a large, cost reduction in the form of millions across our estate, that's a no-brainer, and that's the way we can contribute to that value. So it's not necessarily measuring fraud itself; it's the elimination if we can do that for our owners.
For the owner, so reducing operational burden for them.
Absolutely.
So let's dive deep a little bit into how companies define business value when assessing the cost of fraud. I'd like to drill a little bit deeper. When we were thinking about sessions, Matt and I spoke about Wayfair having this concept of a single metric, which was something I found very unique. How do you take all of these dimensions that you talked about, Genevieve, and all of these different models into a single metric? So can you talk about how Wayfair does that?
Yeah, absolutely. We started by realizing we needed a way to determine trade-offs between different groups, right? Customer service or sales, approval rates versus chargeback rates. So at the end of the day, it all came down to profit. So what we tried to create was a metric that simulated that. We call it TCOF, and that stands for total cost of fraud. So TCOF has two components. The direct component, so direct costs of fraud, and that's going to hit bad debt. So our finance team and accounting teams in particular, we're really interested in that. And then the indirect component, and that's going to be things like compensation or profit not captured. Profit not captured you could think of as an estimate of what our false positive lost profit would be. And so what we do is we take a look at approval rate, and then we find the inverse, effectively what's decline rate. We say what is obvious fraud. We know without a doubt that is fraud. We remove that from it. And now what you're left with is sort of risk-based declines. And of that, we take an estimate of what is false positive. And that since that's at the top line number, we bring that down with all of our margins, and you wind up with a bottom line dollar amount. Now, on the direct side, we decided to include absolutely everything that goes into that. So the fees that we might pay to Forder, the fines that we might get when there is a chargeback, when we decide to represent that. And then obviously there's the chargeback cost as well. And so one of the things that we thought a lot about was, how do you think about chargebacks, especially in a world where some of you might be in a chargeback guarantee model or have insurance of some sort. And so we focus in TCOF on the uninsured chargebacks. And we look at that net after winnings. And so when we did this, we built every aspect of it down to the order level. And so when you talk about fees paid to vendors, when you talk about costs associated, what we called fines, because we have them at order level, we can then cut by all of the dimensions we might be interested in. Different lines of business, B2B versus B2C, different payment methods. And then you can start to forecast out where your chargeback curves will land so that you can actually look cohort by cohort, week by week, month by month to see how you're performing.
So do you have different business models for each one of those segments based on what that TCOF is for each one of them?
It's a great question. I wouldn't say we have different business models, but we do think about different lines of business differently. We might be willing to accept a little more risk in some of our more high CLV type customers. On some of the lower ones, we might not be willing to. We take all of that into account, but it's really insightful when you start to see things like, hey, why is the B2B cost of fraud double B2C? Should it be? And you can start to answer that question. And it's really helpful when you start to get into when you have an attack, because you'll see it's hitting specific bins or you'll see it's hitting specific payment methods. And so that then allows you to react a bit faster.
Got it. Super interesting. Denise, you speak about a North Star versus then a specific metric. Tell us a little bit about how that North Star ties into dimensions and KPIs and how you manage around that.
Sure. So the way that we look at fraud is while we are mitigating and fighting against fraud, we care about our legitimate customers. That's why one of our core and main metric is FPR, false positive ratio, and also it's known as false decline ratio in the company. So that explains, in order to catch $1 of bad fraud, how much good business, good fraud, or good kind of GME we are hurting. So our goal as a risk team, of course, we have our loss budget, but I think even our CEO set our goal this year. It was funny. He said, hey, I want you to kind of take more challenge. And this is a North Star that we need to make this kind of as precise as possible. I think that's kind of was a really motivating metric for us, because we are not only kind of counting how much dollar we are kind of losing for fraud, but we are trying to really tailor our strategies and really just do surgical almost kind of strategies to find the right balance between mitigating fraud and managing growth for the organization. As a risk organization also, we have an incremental GME goal, which is tied to, again, making the right decisioning and kind of really finding the right group of people to add friction and reduce friction from our good buyers. Incremental GME is another kind of risk goal for us. So we have a goal that's set up for us, and our really goal is to hit that goal. And this is kind of not only a risk team, but I think our product teams, engineering teams, we are all aligned on target, and everyone is motivated to, while mitigating fraud, they're also helping the company grow. There's another metric, which is not a goal for us, but we keep track of it. And I found this very motivating for my team. This is how much fraud is mitigated. So oftentimes you only talk about losses incurred, right? How much losses we had, what's the basis points losses. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, all of you are kind of fighting against fraud and mitigating a lot of it. And this is a metric called mitigated fraud amount, total amount. And how we calculate it is we are looking at our control group, which we don't take any action, how much fraud is coming and how much of it is mitigated by our current models and rules. So it's the huge amount. And even at the leadership level, our C level, so in the past, only loss number was being discussed. Now we are talking about, hey, this is how much we have mitigated. It's way more than what is kind of incurred. So it's giving a different perspective. So, hey, losses is a cost center versus, hey, this is how much you have contributed to the business and to allow legitimate users to shop safely.
That's a really interesting way of doing that. You talk about a control group. That's a very risky move, right? So you've got a control group where you're like, okay, if fraud goes in there, how much are you allowed to keep in that control group and let it ride, or do you balance it with?
We keep it constant. So of course we have some budgets, but I think we keep it constant to be able to measure and compare ourselves with the previous year. So we are not changing it as much. Of course, we have some exclusions for high risk exclusions. But we keep it constant so that we can just kind of measure ourselves this year, how much fraud pressure we have versus how much we have mitigated. So I think that's been constant.
Just keep it controlled.
Yes, we keep it controlled.
Absolutely. So, you all make it sound really easy when we're here on stage having a single metric, a TCOF or a North Star where we all align. And I think we all know that it's not that easy to get to that single metric. So my third question is here around organizational alignment. How do you drive organizational alignment around driving business value? Genevieve, I'm going to start with you because you really have a broad lens.
Yeah.
What do you see in terms of driving organizational alignments at different companies that you work with?
Yeah, it's a really good and important question.
Yeah.
Because of the increase in attack and the kind of the prevalence of these bad actors these days, it's really important to have the right operating model. And unfortunately, there's no one size that fits all. Every company is different. And so in our experience, we've seen different operating models per se, right? So some companies are more centralized. They've got a fraud operations group that's responsible for all things fraud across the company. We've seen a federated model. So sometimes in customer experience, sometimes in product, sometimes in finance, sometimes in operations. So it's kind of fragmented. And we've seen hybrid models, right? So it's kind of a combination of both. So again, it's defining and designing the proper operating models so that you guys are more agile, right, in managing, preventing, detecting, and responding to fraud. So pros and cons with the different models. But at the end of the day, as long as there's collaboration and communication and governance of fraud management, because at the end of the day, you need the right leaders and executive sponsors to support your fraud program and provide the budgets, right? So
that I was actually going to ask you, do you have to have that executive alignment? And when you do have the executive alignments, what are the typical executives that you see involved in getting that in alignments from your experience?
It's the C-suite. So we're talking CFO, COO, CEO, CRO is also very involved, right? So from a risk management perspective, it's a C-suite. You need the C-suite to kind of sponsor and kind of back up the fraud program.
And get everyone aligned. Betsy, I imagine your world is a little more centralized, but still you've got that ownership and the franchisees. How do you create organizational alignment?
I think just given our core business model, we try to keep most things global or centralized. There's always some need for regionalization. But when it comes to your core processes, and the way you can put preventative sort of fraud measures in place, the way to go is in your core centrally owned processes. So from our perspective, putting a Forter solution in the reservation flow, that's going to help all of our hotels. And frankly, they have no way of doing that themselves. So from our lens, from the central perspective, we can put solutions that are sort of one-to-many that they aren't really capable of doing because they're just a one-to-one hotel. So that's really the way we're looking at it. And again, total alignment at the C-suite level and just across technology, the business risk, that's really...
Do you ever get pushback from the franchisees on anything that you've rolled out, or they struggle to adapt to?
Probably not just in the fraud space, but I think that's where you have to get really critical in what you're going to do. So it has to be something that's going to fundamentally be a benefit to them or be a part of their business need and their core priorities. So I'm sure that there's sometimes not agreement from the 6,300 or something, but generally I think we're going in the right direction.
Got it. Denise, we talked about the North Star. You talk around different metrics in really different domains. How did you create organizational alignment around that North Star?
So when I joined eBay 3 years ago, definitely there were lots of established metrics, teams working on it. We don't have any shortage of resources. But I realized that we, as a risk team, we had those goals and we were telling our product and engineering teams what we need and we want them to build on. And I said that, hey, what about bringing everyone into this journey and just having them join this kind of the kind of journey with us? So I created some workshops and 2 days workshops saying that instead of telling them what we want them to do, I was outlining these are problem statements, this is our FDR levels. We need to bring incremental X million dollars of incremental GMV and we need to manage a loss budget. And I said, open table, so anyone has any ideas. You can't believe how incredible and effective that conversation was, because in the past they were only being told what to do. Now they were part of the story. And now 3 years in, we have these workshops every quarter, 2 days long. And when we first started, of course, it was a new program and everyone was waiting. The one that we did last month, it was almost led by our engineering team. And they have brought lots of different ideas of how they can just enable, even they are attending workshops and they are finding opportunities for us to kind of deliver GMV, reducing our issuer decline. So they are even driving those discussions. So it was such a big relief and organizational alignment. I think being transparent and just kind of bringing them along the journey went a long way. And also with our finance teams, right? They are, hey, your budget, you have to just stay below your budget. Now we brought them into our risk appetite structure, and whenever we are either getting close or just about to exceed the kind of our budget, we are bringing, hey, this is how much revenue we are bringing. Do you want to allow us to go a little bit more? Now those conversations are becoming more of an ROI and trade-off discussions than did you meet your goal or just are you below or above your budget? So I would definitely encourage kind of bringing each team together and really just use their strengths. So finance team can allow you to go a little bit kind of more on losses, but if you show them the value, they will definitely come along with you, as well as product and engineering teams. So I think it's really, really effective and we have more brain power now. I don't have to solve it with my team only, and everyone's looking from a different angle and bringing lots of great ideas together. So
I love this idea of workshopping. We're in the post-COVID world where a lot of things are remote. Do you do it actually on site? Do you bring everyone?
We are flying in everyone because I think there's the value of whiteboarding, because there are lots of new ideas, because we are not only talking about current state, but also we are talking about future state. So in the last one, I think we were presenting how AI is changing our kind of environment and how we should be prepared. So there were lots of brainstorming discussions. So we are doing it in person and we are flying in people from different parts of the country.
So getting that bottoms line approach to the North Star, Do you bring in executives, tying into the other comment earlier that you need executive alignments? Do they come in as well for those?
Actually, I do bring it to our C-level, our CRO and CFO. I'm kind of also bringing those discussions and outcomes to them. And those conversations are now much more insightful, and I'm getting a lot of results because instead of talking about, again, budget versus kind of meeting the budget or not, now I'm saying that, hey, do you want extra X million dollars of kind of revenue? I can bring it, but I need a little bit more budget. So those conversations are just kind of 30 minutes, deal done, just go do an experiment and just get the results. So I think showing the value and just really explaining what the risk teams can bring to the table. Again, so risk is usually seen as a cost center, but I believe we changed it at eBay. So buyer risk team is looked at the revenue generating center as well. So that's why we are asking lots of, hey, can you bring X more $1 million? And
everyone's happy with an extra.
Everyone is happy.
I do want to underscore that though, because it's an opportunity to also educate the executives in terms of the fraud threat landscape, cyber attacks, right? And it's just not slowing down. And they need to understand the risks that they're taking and what we're all facing every day. So I do want to underscore the fact that we need to elevate the conversations at the C-suite level just to get your support. And a lot of these C-suite, very focused on business and driving the business revenue, et cetera, but just kind of, giving them an understanding or a better understanding of the threat landscape is important.
Yeah.
So,
and actually, maybe I can add one more thing there. So a few months back, our CFO was kind of saying that, hey, risk, of course, he's concerned about risks, right? So he wasn't sure how good our defenses are. Of course, we are managing a budget, but he doesn't know how capable we are. The last metric that I mentioned, how much fraud we have mitigated, it showed the magnitude of things to him and how much actually a small portion of it is realized as losses. Now I now have the comfort that you know what you are doing and this team is super capable and we have defenses, because in the past he didn't know much detail. So definitely it helped to get them in alignment.
Interesting. Matt, we talked about TCOF. I'm sure when you first came up with this concept, everyone looked at you. What are you talking about? How did you get organizational alignment around this concept of we're going to look at a single metric? How do you pitch it to the different teams, and how did you get alignment?
It took a lot of education. So the first thing that we did was we partnered with our finance team, and we explained that by creating this metric, they were going to have more visibility into bad debt, the causes of bad debt, and better able to forecast bad debt. Therefore, they could have a more accurate reserve for our quarterly filings. They jumped on that, and so we partnered with them to create this metric. Once we had a metric definition, we began circulating that without any data. And that was very intentional. By doing that, it kept the conversation with all the varying executives across the company focused on are we accounting for everything? Did we forget something? Versus your area is performing well or not well.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important way to do it. Do it with no data whatsoever. Get alignment on the metric first.
Yeah. And then we brought the numbers.
How did that go over?
And in some areas, like you might expect, but in others, it went over quite well. And so we did that. We rolled out the reporting. Everything, like I mentioned, is at order level. You can cut by any dimension. And we made that available to everyone. So it wasn't us going to them. We actually have enabled them to look themselves at how they're performing, how fraud is impacting their business via this TCOF metric. It also means that when we're talking about some kind of policy change, be it even just how we handle customer sales on the phone, they're able to understand, yes, there's an impact to my sales coming through this channel, but net, the benefit is more positive for Wayfair and our customers overall.
So TCOF is a very business-centric metric. How do you get organizational alignments with your engineering teams that might not necessarily use these in their day-to-day language?
Yeah, it's a great question. Also education. So we spent a while with our engineering team, some of whom are here in the audience today, and we went and talked through, hey, this is what we're working on. We also looked at how much fraud we had blocked in the previous year, and it was quite a large number. But then we showed them the number of what we left on the table in false positives and what it cost us in chargebacks and fees, and that was also a pretty large number. And so we got people pretty excited and energized, and we found that our technology teams actually get just as motivated behind business metrics when they realize the impact that they're having on them. And so as they're working on individual projects, even a sprint by sprint level, they realize the impact that they're having for Wayfair and our customers.
Because you look at the TCOF after every sprint and kind of showcase those.
I wouldn't say after every sprint, but I would say on the varying projects that they worked on.
Very good. So as we're wrapping up, I just wanted to think through the key takeaways you want to leave the audience with. Genevieve, I'll start with you. Any important takeaways for the audience here?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, having the right operating model is very important, because if you think about it, it's not just fraud tools that we're talking about. It's not just fraud operations. You've got cyber teams who have similar tools, right? So if you add it all up, it's a lot. It's talking about cost of fraud. It's not just there's multiple teams and tools that support a program. So designing the right operating model, the right governance models, and kind of interaction across AML, fraud, cyber is super important. So my recommendation is to consider assessing your program operating models.
Betsy?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, being more of the product and technology, it's all down to cost reward. There's a lot of solutions that you can do to mitigate fraud, and that's part of your value proposition is how you go about that.
Denise, final takeaways.
Final takeaways. So I think I would just change the perspective of risk teams in your organization from being a cost center to revenue center. I think one, it gives a totally different perspective, and you can just definitely have much more productive conversations with your leadership. And also it gives your team a big motivation, because it's not always easy to be the cost center and always kind of being on the surface, on the scene whenever there's a bad activity happening. But I think you can motivate your team by converting from cost center to revenue center. I think it's one thing that I would just share.
Love it. Matt, final thoughts?
I guess I would just say you guys have heard 4 different ways of measuring fraud, and I don't think any one of them is correct. It's really about what's going to work for you and your business, for your company. And so explore these, explore others, but ultimately try and figure out how do you bring this culture of monitoring and measuring fraud to your organization as a whole.
Thank you. Well, please thank the panelists. Really interesting insight. Thank you.